I recently read a National Geographic article that suggested the Pilgrims came to America because they were just too straight-laced for Dutch culture. And most people don't really know why the Pilgrims left Holland, because as Kevin was sharing, they had lots of freedom there. And they were able to live out their lives in faithfulness before God in many ways. And William Bradford, in his Of Plymouth Plantation, lists some of the reasons for their going to America. One of these was the 12-year truce with Spain had just ended, and their freedom in Holland would soon dwindle to nothing. They didn't know that yet, because it wasn't until 7 months after they left that Albert VII died, and Holland returned to Spanish control. So that couldn't have been better timing. That was God's providence. But they heard the rumblings, so they knew something was going to happen. They knew they were going to likely lose some freedom. Some of the reasons he lists are that their community was getting older, their children were leaving, no new families were coming from England. So their vision was lacking a little bit. They were losing momentum as a community. And definitely the primary reason that they left. He lists it in these sentences many of you probably have heard. They cherished a great hope and inward zeal of laying good foundations, or at least making some way towards it, for the propagation and advance of the gospel of Christ in the remote parts of the world, even though they should be but stepping stones to others in the performance of so great a work. So it was missional. Their main reason for going to America was missional. They knew they might die. Stepping stones aren't a very flattering image to compare yourself to. But they also had a cause that they were passionate about.
Yeah, and it was through writings such as Richard Hakluyt. These men were visionaries who saw the opportunities in the New World as a great resource for the Puritans to start working towards. So they heard about these great promises of America and started writing tracts and pamphlets to communicate these new hopes to their fellow Englishmen, and it was the Pilgrims that saw that and took that opportunity.
All right, so I think the best way to characterize what the Pilgrims and people in Europe knew about the New World was principally the word unknown. There were lots of glowing tales told about the Americas at that point in time, that they were lush and green and lots of fish, and there were lots of game. And for many people in Europe, going there was a get-rich-quick scheme. So there were people like that wanted to go on a voyage like this. And then there were also the rumors about death and hardship, differing climates. So there were a lot of unknowns, a lot of big questions for people that wanted to travel from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean. And the Pilgrims weren't the first to do it, of course. Many of you have probably heard of Jamestown and Roanoke, which were both English colonies settled during James's reign. Roanoke was wiped out due to war and starvation and disease. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the story of Roanoke as well, and Jamestown suffered a great deal at the beginning just because only men went. So it was a group of men with no women and children, which can work for a very short period of time, but in the long term doesn't really build a population or a culture. And so both of these, Roanoke ended very quickly. Jamestown lasted a couple of years after Plymouth, and then both of them disappeared through disease and starvation and death and struggle with the native populations. And I think the other characteristic that I would say about both of these previous settlements was that they weren't solidly based on the same principles that the Pilgrims came with. So there were good people that went to both of those settlements, but they weren't characterized by the same convictions that the Pilgrims were.
So when the Pilgrims are trying to arrange passage to the New World, they end up working with merchant companies to be able to secure a ship, and Sir Edwin Sandys is very instrumental in obtaining permission from the king to be able to get a patent so that they can travel. And initially he tried on their behalf to get one for religious liberty purposes. And the king almost was persuaded to do this until the Anglican bishops caught wind of that scheme, and then they put a stop to that. And so he was able to secure an immigration passage and the promise of the king to not meddle in their religious permissions. So it was on September 6th that the Pilgrims set out on the expedition and jumped on board the Mayflower and began their long and arduous journey to the Americas.